Welcome to a little patch of grass in sunny Berkshire in England. Now, I know this looks pretty unassuming. It just looks like a rather glorious flying club. But this is a very, very particular aerodrome that played such an important part in the war. And the reason it has a fantastic story to tell is because of the people who came here to work from here. They were pilots who came from all over the world to volunteer their services, to play their part. And what was extraordinary about them is that they were all women. Of course, they weren't allowed to fly on the front line in battle, but they knew they had something they could deliver. And so they asked if they could actually play a part in the war effort. What was remarkable about them is that they already knew how to fly. So many of them came from wealthy families where they had learned to fly in the 30s or so, learned to fly for fun. But they could fly, my goodness, could they fly? And when they came here and joined together, they were expected to fly planes all over. But the most incredible thing was that they were expected to fly all sorts of planes, Spitfires, Hurricanes, huge bombers like the Wellington and the Lancaster. And not only were they able to fly them, they flew them alone, often at night, in secret, without radio, without any sort of backup, and just having sort of scanned a map before they set off. They were incredibly courageous women with absolutely amazing stories to tell. And we will tell you the stories because some of them have real character. And after the war, they achieved incredible things too. This is White Waltham Airfield, and this is where it all happened. This is where the ATA, the Air Transport Auxiliary, was formed. This is where these women came from South Africa, from Australia, from absolutely everywhere you can think of, and they banded together. Some of them were incredibly glamorous too. They became known as the ATA girls, the ATA girls, and my goodness, did they live up to their name. And this is where it all happened. Richard, tell me all about the ATA, basically. I mean, why was it set up? What was its function? Who was part of it? And when did it all happen?
That's just a short answer I'll give you then. The 1930s in particular were the period of the great pioneering flights. Amy Johnson going to Australia, Amelia Earhart, Lindbergh across the Atlantic, and so on. And the whole world got the flying bug. And so there grew up quite a significant cohort of private pilots in the 1930s. And one of those was a man called Gérard Delanger, who was a director of the pre-war British Airways and a director of Coutts Bank.
Oh, he could afford to then.
He could afford to, and he knew everybody. As war approached, he began to lobby the government and to say, there must be something that people like me, who know how to fly, can do to contribute to the war effort. We know we're too old for the RAF, over 25, or we're unfit, wear glasses or something different, which I'll talk about shortly. And eventually his persuasion worked, and literally in August 1939, not long before war broke out, the Air Ministry decided that actually these amateur civilian pilots could be quite useful to do routine stuff so that the highly trained RAF pilots could fight the war in the air. And so ATA was established days before the beginning of the war, and 1,000 men who had at least 250 flying hours and a flying license were circulated to say, are you interested? By the end of the second week of September, they had interviewed, flight tested and signed contracts with the first 29.
My goodness, that is fast.
Yeah, really fast. The aeroplanes were going to be requisitioned civilian light aeroplanes, and they were going to do things like shift medicines, spare parts, military bigwigs to wherever they needed to go. By the time we get into 1940, the RAF delegated to Air Transport Auxiliary the entire job of routine movement of aeroplanes. And the basic job became collect a brand new aeroplane from outside a factory, take it possibly to a maintenance unit, for instance, to have its cameras put in it if it was going to be a photo reconnaissance aeroplane, or to a storage unit, or direct to a frontline squadron, which meant that before the boys in blue got in their brand new Spitfire or whatever, it had already been flown by a rank amateur. And one of the astonishing things is that ATA was in jest said to stand for Ancient and Tattered Airmen.
Ah, great.
And one of the first bunch had been in the Royal Flying Corps in World War One and injured, and he was blind in his left eye and missing most of his left arm.
My goodness, but he was useful
He was
in
useful.
the ATA. When did women get involved then?
Almost from the beginning. There was a lady called Pauline Gower, who was equally well connected as Gérard Delanger. Daddy was an MP and a sometime lawyer, and she made her living in the 1930s giving joyrides in flying circuses.
So she was very experienced, but,
She was
but
hugely
incredibly
experienced.
enthusiastic just as a flyer.
Yes, and she knew that there was nothing inherently masculine about flying aeroplanes, and she lobbied for women to be allowed to do the same job as the men. And eventually, the powers that be capitulated, and they allowed her to recruit 8 women, and she signed up the first 8 on New Year's Day 1940, which was just another working day.
Yes.
And 2 weeks later, they wheeled them out for the press to have their photographs taken, scrambling, wearing parachutes, flapping around their backsides, to a tiger moth and all ridiculous things.
Yeah, a bit of a beauty parade,
Yes,
which
yes.
I imagine they didn't really like.
When word spread that women might be joining ATA, some of the establishment were extremely rude about them and said the menace of women wanting to fly a great big bomber is that they're not capable of looking after their husband and cooking him dinner or scrubbing a factory floor, which is outrageous.
It is.
In our day and age in particular, but in those it was par for the course.
I've seen some quotes from some of the women who say we just had to take misogyny on the
Yes,
chin. We
yes.
just had to smile through it.
Yes, exactly. So the women joined in the beginning of 1940. They were going to be restricted to single-engine trainers and slightly obsolete types, and the boys were going to keep the toys for themselves. And it took 18 months before Pauline Gower felt confident enough to go to higher authority and say, don't you think the girls ought to have a go at flying something, the single-engine fighters? They were more reliable than the men because they didn't do such damn fool things for a start. Once they were cleared to fly fighters in July 1941, that opened up all the twin-engined bomber and fighter aeroplanes like the Mosquito, like the Wellington and so on. And the story is about Mary Wilkins, who delivered a Wellington bomber, which they flew solo to an RAF station. And she taxied in, she turned the engines off, she got out, and the ground crew was standing around like lemons. And she said, aren't you going to take me to get my paperwork signed? And they said, we're waiting for the pilot. I am the pilot, wailed Mary. And they would not believe her until they'd searched this dirty great bomber from one end to the other.
They literally searched it.
Yes.
Because they knew that there must be a man in there somewhere who'd actually done the flying.
They just didn't believe. If we move forward from 1941 to the back end of 1942, Pauline Gower got permission for a handful of women to convert to 4-engine bombers. And a lady called Lettice Curtis started her conversion in the October of 1942. It was a lousy winter and it took her a long while to actually complete that. But in early 1943, she was finally signed out on a Halifax bomber. Pauline Gower felt confident enough at that point to go to the authorities and say, now the women are doing exactly the same job as the men, you need to pay them the same money, which was agreed.
And that makes it almost a first, doesn't it?
I reckon it was the first equal opportunities employer in Britain.
That's amazing, but also well deserved. Were they valued at the time?
Oh, yes.
You've got a lovely picture of the King and Queen coming to White Waltham to see them. Were they really valued? Did they know how important they were? Were they heroic?
Yes, they were. Yeah, but so were the men. You know, I mean, I think flying in all weathers with no radios and map reading you've got to be brave. You've got to be cool-headed too, to get yourself out of that. The boss of one of the ladies' pools said, if you don't like the weather, land. You are paid to be safe, not brave.
And you're also paid to get an aircraft from A to B, aren't you?
Yes,
That's your job.
not break it.
Yeah. Some of them went on to have remarkable careers after the war. I mean, Jackie Moggridge.
Jackie Moggridge became Britain's first commercial female captain. Yeah.
And broke the sound barrier. Well, the first female pilot to break the sound barrier.
Yes, she wasn't the first one in the world, but that's what she wanted to be.
Yes.
But yes, I mean, she was quite a player. She delivered nearly 1,500 aeroplanes in the course of the war. When her children were little, she used to bring them in carry cots and put them in the back of the cockpit, in a little airliner going from Portsmouth to Guernsey and back.
Well, that was an everyday thing for her, I suppose.
What's amazing is how long it took the main airlines, and the RAF for that matter, to admit that women pilots were just as good.
So actually it's the ATA that proved that.
Yes, absolutely. But Lettice Curtis, the first lady to fly the four-engine bomber, after the war, she filled in an application for a pilot's job with the airline BOAC, but where it had name, she just put her initials, E.L. Curtis, rather than her full name. And she was asked to go to an interview, and when she walked in, they said, sorry, there must be some mistake.
Is that right?
And think about what happened afterwards. Some of them stayed in flying. The ones that stayed in flying generally stayed in general aviation. But most of them got married, had babies, looked after husband, kids, and home, because that was the way of the world.
Yes. It seems extraordinary because they had done so much.
Exactly.
They'd broken through a glass ceiling, actually, hadn't they? But it was a while before that.
Yes. It wasn't surprising that the first really magisterial study was written by Lettice Curtis in the 70s, and it's called The Forgotten Pilots.
So they felt forgotten. I mean, they'd done that incredible work, but then just told to go back into the kitchen.
Yes, effectively, exactly right. And BA got its first women pilots in the 80s, and they were just as good. I was a training captain at that stage, and I know they're just as good. My daughter is a BA training captain now, and she's a better pilot than I was.
Oh, that's a lovely thing to say. And what you've got here is remarkable. All authentic. These beautiful, I mean, for a start, the beautiful pictures which show they were glamorous. They knew they were glamorous. I mean, that's why they got into flying in the first place, a lot of them. And they really enjoyed it. Did the men resent the fact that they became known as the Atta girls? They had, an element of glamour to them.
Yes, but more so after the war, when everything was being forgotten, because the men outnumbered the women by 6-1. Very early on, that photo opportunity at Hatfield on the 15th of January 1940, when the entire press corps was there, the photographs were all over the place. Articles appeared saying, they're doing a man's job, blah, 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 and full of wrong facts further down. But the real confirmation of it was a front page on Picture Post in 1944, and by magic, I'm going to show it to you.
I mean, it's just sensational, isn't it? Look at that.
It is absolutely sensational.
Who's she?
She is Maureen Dunlop, who was brought up in Argentina and spoke Spanish. She swore that this was not posed.
Well, yes, okay. Well, we'll give her that.
I'm not sure that I believed it.
But I mean, she looks about 18, doesn't she? If that. You talk about them as though you know all their stories, and they are amazing stories.
Yes.
And they go with the lovely, beautiful, amazing faces that we see in so many photographs.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a very personal thing for you.
It is. And I'm determined that the story should never, ever be forgotten again. That's my mission. That's this museum's mission, that story is never forgotten. It's one of those stories in history, if it wasn't true, you wouldn't believe it.
Yes, who would think? Bringing in young women to do such an important job with absolutely no help almost. Yes, it's absolutely extraordinary, and it's just based in that little airfield up the road from here.
Yes.
But what you've done here is make sure that that memory lives with all of these beautiful bits and pieces, which we'll have a look at in a minute. Okay, Richard, so what have we got here?
The first thing is that every pilot has to record
Everything.
flight that they make. And this is, in fact, at least 3 logbooks bound together with gold tooling.
Yeah, it looks
It's
beautiful, doesn't
magnificent.
it?
It belonged to a lady called Philippa Bennett, and it starts in June 1940, and it goes on and on and on. They had to do monthly summaries, so you get a huge variety of aircraft, from single-engine taxi aeroplanes. In the bottom of this one, there's a Halifax bomber and a Lancaster bomber, and in between there are fighters and everything else.
Yes.
And I'm often asked, how on earth did they learn how to fly all these different sorts of aeroplanes? And the answer is, they didn't. In each group, they learned to fly a generic type
A certain
that would
sort.
do, so a twin-engine aeroplane. And then, if they were presented with an aeroplane they'd never seen before, this is a genuine, much battered
Ferry pilot's notes.
pilot's notes. It has everything you need to fly any military aircraft in service at the time on a maximum of 2 pages. The print is tiny.
Yes.
And aeroplanes rattle and shake.
Yeah.
And if you're in something that's crossing the country at 300 miles an hour, you haven't got time
Yeah,
to
you
read
couldn't
the book.
read it, even if it was on your lap. No.
So you read it before you actually start the engine. But this was their Bible.
But in no other circumstance would a pilot have to know so much about so many
No.
aircraft.
No.
That's astonishing, isn't it? And what's this?
This is a private photo album, but
Oh, look.
it's wonderful. And there's one photograph I really do want to show you. Here we are.
Oh,
And
these
this has
lovely
got Mary
people.
Ellis in it. This is the crew transport from the
Buttercup
aeroplane
van.
back to the building. It's just a funny little truck that says the Buttercup on the side of it.
These are magic photographs.
Yes, they are.
And where did you get them from?
Well,
People give them to you.
This album was donated to us by one of the veterans.
And so many
relatives.
people do that, don't they? Because
Yes.
they want
They want
to be remembered.
Their record, it needs to be retained.
Beautiful.
I must tell you a story from one of the American women, Anne Wood, whose tunic is in the display case right behind me. She was based at a base called Ratcliffe near Leicester. And one day, she and 2 others, one of whom was one of the Brits, who was so happy-go-lucky, he thought none of the rules applied to him. And they were sent to Castle Bromwich to pick up 3 Spitfires and go to Weston-super-Mare.
Oh, yeah.
It's a lovely summer's day. How do you get to Weston-super-Mare? Do you need a map? Nah. Fly from Castle Bromwich south until you hit the River Severn. When it widens out, stick on the left-hand side. It's the 3rd place with a pier.
Crumbs, is that really how they did it?
Yeah, because they haven't got time no time to read a map in a Spitfire, especially the speed that Johnny was flying and they were following. There used to be a railway bridge across the River Severn, just south of Sharpness, where it begins to widen out. And as they approached, they passed over Gloucester, and he led them into a shallow dive to right above the waves, and he led them underneath this railway bridge.
They went underneath the railway bridge.
Underneath the railway bridge. 3 of them in a row. Anne Wood told me she thought this was the best thing since sliced bread. And 2 weeks later, she was sent to Castle Bromwich, pick up a Spitfire, take it to Weston-super-Mare. She thought, I know what I'm going to do. And this time she frightened herself absolutely witless, because the first time the mighty tides of the River Severn had been down here.
Yes, it's a very
and
tidal
the
river.
second time they were up there,
Yeah.
and she only just went underneath.
Oh, my
She never did
goodness.
that again.
No.
But they weren't supposed to do things like that, and they weren't supposed to do aerobatics, but they did.
It sums up the spirit of the
Yes.
people. And the way you talk about them,
Yes.
you know them.
I've met an enormous number of them, and as a retired airline pilot myself with 33 years flying, I am forever humbled, amazed, honoured to have known them. No, it's an astonishing story. One of the ladies said to me, I didn't want the war to end.
Oh,
I was having so much fun.
yeah.
You know.
I can imagine that.
And there was a lot of fun, but as I said, there were 173 killed, and the biggest bunch of ATA graves in the world is in a cemetery in Maidenhead.
there can be nowhere better to talk about one of the most brilliant and bright ATA pilots than in front of the very plane that she delivered. It's got quite a story to it as well. This was Jackie Moggridge, and she really was one of the brightest and best. I tell you what, she was one of the most glamorous as well. And there can be nobody better to talk to about her than her very own daughter Candy, who's with me now. Congratulations, your mother was amazing. When she was born in Pretoria in South Africa, she had one ambition really, and that was to fly. Where did that come from?
Oh, well, she had two very, very boisterous brothers who she followed around all the time. She was a real tomboy, and she wanted to always be part of their games, and they just called her Sissy. So she saw a plane went overhead, and she thought, I'll show you. She said, I'm going to be a pilot. And they went, oh, yeah. And then she felt compelled to follow up on it.
And didn't she become the first ever female pilot in South Africa? Or the youngest?
She was the youngest.
Youngest female.
And the youngest to do a parachute jump in South Africa when she was only 15.
Crumbs.
Yeah. And then she got her A licence, and she met Doreen Hooper, was the first woman to get her commercial pilot's licence, and she thought, I know, I'm going to do that
as well.
So she came to England.
She was ambitious. She always saw something she wanted to reach out for. Always. So she came to England. Certainly adventurous. She came to England in what year would that have been?
1937. Had a year of a commercial pilot training at Aeronautical College, Whitney in Oxford, and then war broke out. And she'd been the only woman learning to fly there, and there was one other woman who was learning to be an engineer. And then, of course, they shut down the college, and Mum said, come on, you've got to come home. War's breaking out. And she went, no, I'm going to fly for Britain. And she wrote to the RAF, and they said, no, we don't take women pilots. So she joined the WAF.
That's the Women's Auxiliary Air Force.
That's right.
That's it, yeah.
And
what did she end up doing in the WAF?
She ended up on radar, which she felt was incredibly important, incredibly secret. And she was there for 6 months, and she watched the Battle of Britain on the screen, and she found it incredibly moving.
So she was watching a radar screen?
Yeah, a series of
just
dots.
little dots. But she knew, being trained for it, she knew what it meant. In fact, she wrote about it very movingly, didn't she?
Very movingly, about the echoes, as they called them, coming together. And then she'd watch as one would fade away, and left with one that she watched with bated breath to see if it went back eastwards towards Germany.
She could see the surviving blip on the screen.
She knew.
If she knew it was going back towards Germany, that was a death, probably.
She saw every death.
Good God.
And as she said, it was a lover, brother, husband, son, somebody had lost.
You've got a passage from that book, haven't you?
I have.
There's somewhere you could find it. Just read it to us. I know it's very moving. Yes.
Anxiously, we appraised the results of our work until the two echoes joined in combat in a single oscillating blur that told of tally-ho, twisting evasion, screaming engines, the shrill rat-a-tat of machine guns, or the throatier bark of cannon. We watched the eloquent echo as fathers, brothers and lovers fought on the razor edge of life or death, and were silent if the echo, after battle, moved steadily eastwards towards enemy territory, leaving behind a dying echo that remained stationary for a few tragic seconds before fading as the life it represented faded into oblivion. Still find it moving.
It is moving because, she was watching the battle play out on a screen in front of her.
Yeah.
And that was her work in radar.
Yeah.
But it's amazing. She only stuck at that for a while because...
Yes, 6 months later, the Air Transport Auxiliary had started, and originally they only had men to transport the planes from the factories to the waiting fighter pilots, and they ran out of men. And ATA got dubbed Ancient and Tattered Airmen because they could only use the old ones and the infirm ones. And they then had to go for women.
Which was even worse, yes.
Yeah.
But they did.
Yeah.
Did they write to her and say, do you
They
want to volunteer?
wrote to her and said, come and do a flight test. She would have been over the moon. I've got the letter. But then, of course, she passed the flight test, and Pauline Gower said, you've got to come. And Radar said, no, we can't let you go. We've trained you. We need you here. But Pauline said it takes a lot longer to train a pilot. She's coming. And to my mum's delight, she joined number 15 ferry pool, all-woman ferry pool in Hamble. She was the 15th girl to join. Eventually, there would be 168 women flying in the 88.
And frankly, I know it was war, and clearly war is a terrible thing, but she must have had the time of her life from that moment.
They all did. They loved it. They were given, there's there's a little book here, 147 planes during the war were put into this and out again as they were decommissioned, and they had to fly any time, 5 planes a day, 5 different warplanes a day. So they had to have the knowledge. A lot of them are single-seater.
Yeah.
I mean, they only had one cab.
Yeah,
one.
so there was nobody to train you in it. You had to just get in it and
most
fly.
of them were like that. So you had to be told what the speeds were that you needed and the runway distance and everything. And so literally, this is one plane a side.
Is that your mum's book?
A postcard side. This is a copy of her book. Her book's in the museum in Biggin Hill. Now, her book is old, faded. These have gone, bits of string.
Yes.
She's written on the pages. And there was a page a day. And literally, they kept it in their boot because they called it the Bible. They couldn't fly without it.
Oh, I see. It goes in one of these side pockets.
And they, in fact, my mother, who was flying, they used to give lifts if they had time in the plane. They had room, obviously, and she was giving a lift to someone. The weather was dreadful, and they took off in this dreadful weather. They got where they needed, they landed, and the commandant came over and said to the chap, "Wow," he said, "how's your flight in this weather?" And he went, "I know." He said, "Not only did you send me a mere schoolgirl to fly me," he said, "but all that weather she's reading a novel." And my mother went, no, it's not a novel, it's my ferry pilot's notes. I've never flown this plane before."
And that's all the tuition she got for that plane.
It's all, that's how it was.
Now look, we are sitting in front of a particularly famous aircraft, and one that really means something to you. Tell us about the relationship between your mother and this very Spitfire.
Well, ML407 holds a very special place in my mother's heart and mine, because she flew 667 Spitfires in her lifetime.
Wow.
That's just the Spitfires, not all the other planes. And in her logbook here, it has ML407, and she flew it on the 29th of April 1944. Now, Carolyn Grace knocked on the door and said to her years later, "You were the first woman to fly my plane." She said, and they got chatting, and she said, "Would you like to go up in it again?" 50 years to the day, so it would be 1994, on that very day in April, they flew it again.
Because this is the same, exactly the same aircraft.
Spitfire.
So your mother was the first to fly it properly.
From the
factory
to the
squadron.
waiting airline pilot from New Zealand Squadron, Johnny Holton, and he took it up the next day for D-Day and shot the first plane down on D-Day in this plane.
Yeah.
And then
sorry, I just want to go through that again. Your mother flew it from the factory
Yes.
to the squadron
Yes.
to Johnny
Holton.
Johnny Holton took it over then
Yes.
and flew it on D-Day.
Yes.
And he made the first kill of D-Day in it
this
over
plane.
the Normandy
In this
beaches.
plane, in
I
this
know.
plane. And so my mother got to fly it again,
Yes.
50 years to the day.
I know
And-
that it is the most amazing piece of history, that, isn't
Yeah.
it? And
And
your mum's
it's
part of it,
special.
and now you're part of it too.
Yes, because when my mother died in 2004, Carolyn dropped her ashes from this plane over Dunk as well.
Yeah.
So it was very special.
Yes, it still is very special.
Yes,
It's special to everybody in war, but to your family, I mean,
Yeah.
amazing. But your mother was an amazing person. Tell us more about her. You've got little bits and bobs
I've
there
got
that
some
tell
bits
us
and
about
bobs.
her.
Well, she, as you say, was adventurous. So when the war finished, she thought, I'm not going to stop flying. I've got to get my commercial pilot's license. So she joined the RAF. And she got her RAF wings.
Oh, and you've got
And
her wings.
I've got her wings and her ATA badges. But the RAF wings, she was incredibly proud of that, because only 5 women got their RAF wings, and then they stopped women doing such things, and they just wouldn't let them
Well,
take.
they allowed them and then they stopped them.
Yeah, they didn't write it in the history books.
Well,
you know.
actually, talking of sexism, I mean, she did come across that. They all did, I suppose,
They
didn't
all
they?
came across a prejudice. You know, they didn't think women could fly, and so
And very often when they delivered a plane, where the delivery people hadn't been expecting a woman and often didn't believe that a woman had flown the plane there.
no, and they weren't expecting women to get out of the cockpit, so she'd fly in.
Yeah, tell me the story of the men who were sunbathing.
Yeah, they were sunbathing.
In nude,
Well-
frankly, on the airfield, just waiting for a plane to be delivered.
And my mother turned up, but she couldn't understand because she couldn't see that they're just outside the Nissen hut. So she landed and she, as she undid the canopy, took her helmet off, her hair went flying, and all the men rushed inside. And they'd been sunbathing in the nude. They hadn't expected a woman to come out of the cockpit. And this was the thing of all of the women had, that there were no facilities for women at all. So they were not expected. So there were definitely no loos for women.
Well, yet not only that, they had provided for men to relieve themselves
Yes.
in the plane when they were actually delivering, but they hadn't even thought of how a woman might.
No, a woman just had to cross their legs and hope for the best, no matter how cold it was. My mother said it was always cold. How cold it was up there, or how far they were flying. And actually the Spitfire, which was, of course, their favourite plane.
Was it your mum's favourite?
Yes, absolutely. She said it was like a bird. It was like the wings were her wings, and she'd clambered into it for the first time, in awe of it, really, with the noise of it.
Yeah.
And she said there was a little funnel at the side, and she said, "Oh, what's that?" to the engineer. Is that to be air sick in? And he said, "No, that's for gentlemen pilots, madam."
Oh, I see, yes. So they thought of something for the gentlemen pilots,
the men,
but they hadn't even thought that ever a woman would fly it. And I did read in your mother's book that obviously at a certain time of the month, she used to get terrible stomach cramps, but she still wanted to fly. She wasn't going to let that stop her doing it.
No. She still wanted to fly, and was expected to. So she used to take a hot water bottle with her.
And just hold it on her tummy while she was flying.
Yeah, and the engineers found it and said, "What are you doing with a hot water bottle on this lovely sunny day?" And I couldn't dare tell them why.
No, those things weren't done.
They weren't spoken about. No.
And even when I know that in your collection there's a letter of a report about how well she's doing. She's passed certain exams, or she's exceeded the high standards expected of her. It's addressed to her. But they write about he has done well and he has exceeded this. Yeah. It's only written in masculine language.
Because they'd never written that to, they weren't expecting it to be to a woman. Mm-hmm. So it has he. It does say Miss Jackie Saru at the top, but it's he all the way through, and they put a little S on the he and made it she in some places.
Yeah, crazy. But that's what they were up against, I suppose, all the time.
They were unusual and unexpected.
But they were a funny mix. I mean, your mum was obviously one of them, in that they were... they had attitude and ambition and real, they could really achieve, but they looked glamorous. They loved to look glamorous.
They wouldn't be without their lipstick. No, they had to be safe. They had to fly safely because literally they'd have ruined it for all of the other women if they'd been unsafe. And the men could have fun flying under bridges and everything, and they actually had a very, very good safety record. And so they were actually no nonsense when it came to flying. Took it very seriously, loved their job, absolutely loved it, and they were all terrified the war might end because they'd lose their jobs.
Yes, yeah, they'd have to give the whole thing up. But tell me then about trousers. And in their uniform, and also about the fact that once they had landed, they might be invited to go to a party or a cocktail party in the mess or something. Or tell us about what your mother had in the seat underneath.
Carolyn, Grace, and Mummy had a very good conversation about what you could fit in a Spitfire. And the Mummy said she always had a little black case that just slotted under the seat. And Carolyn went, "Yes, I know what you mean, exactly." And Mummy said, "I don't know about you," she said, "but I always put a little black dress in there and a string of pearls, and then you could go anywhere once you'd landed. If you asked in for the officers' mess for dinner, you had your nice outfit to put on, and it didn't take up any room."
Isn't that incredible? And about the trousers?
Well, they got all the women in. Absolutely no idea. The men designed the uniform, and it was a skirt. And they had to fly all of these bombers.
You couldn't fly this in a skirt.
No, so they had to wear their overalls to fly. And in the end, eventually, the uniform was changed and they could have trousers as well. So there were signs outside the mess that said, "Will women please remove their trousers before entering the mess?" And they meant put your skirt back on.
Yes, that's what they really meant. Absolutely. It just shows that sort of casual sexism, I suppose, that was prevalent at the time.
Oh, absolutely.
But what was your mum like as a mum, and how did she talk? Did she tell you lots of stories?
She did tell actually stories, always the funny ones, and she taught me to fly a Spitfire in bed. but it was very sensitive. She said the duvet in the morning before school, the duvet will be the clouds, she said. And she said, at Spitfire, she said, it's so sensitive. She said, you just hold the joystick, she said, and if you want to turn right, you just think you want to turn right. You don't move it, you think. She said, and the Spitfire, it will just go right smoothly. She said, it was always like flying. She said, you had to, it's like balancing on the point of a knitting needle. You have to line it up with the horizon and you feel it, And yes, she absolutely told stories, but didn't talk a lot about the war. She did talk about meeting my father in the war, and he was from the Royal Engineers, and she used to fly over his barracks. And in the war, all the pilots got an extra chocolate, a ration of chocolate. And so Mummy keep hers. She'd wrap a note round it. She'd throw it out of the cockpit into the barracks, and it had a note saying, whoever finds this, please eat the chocolate, very valuable in the war, but deliver the note to Captain Moggridge.
Oh,
And he always got them.
that's lovely.
Yeah, she used to tell me things like that, nice things about the war.
And he used to point out to your older sister Jill.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Well, my sister Jill she was born in 1946, so they'd got married in 45. So she was very much thrown into Mummy flying a lot all through her life, and she was left at airports and things, and everyone would go, look there, look, that's Mummy dear. There, look, Mummy dear. And she thought planes were Mummy dears. She used to see a plane and go, there's a Mummy dear.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
What a legacy you have helped keep alive. It's important too, isn't it?
Yes, because I think all these stories, you're like your father's, it's important that these war stories that people didn't really know about the ATA, they didn't know about the radar, and they had to keep it secret at the time. And they need to be written in history, and they need to be out there for people who aren't reading history books.
So, Candy, we are both now sitting in your mother's Spitfire.
I know, it's hard to believe, isn't it? I can't, it's thrilling.
You have to actually sort of touch it and remind
do.
yourself that when she sat in it for the very first time, it was an entirely new aircraft, just rolled off the production line, hadn't it?
Brand new. And she was the first one in it, all sparkling, and they were terrified they might damage them, of course.
Well, yes. But what was incredible, I mean, at the time, when she flew it, it was just a single cockpit.
Yes.
It's been modified over the years so that they can take passengers, and so I'm sitting in the passenger seat, and you're the pilot, Candy.
I'm being her.
Yeah, you are being her.
Jackie Moggridge.
I know, isn't that incredible?
Flying Officer Jackie Moggridge. Well, I think, well, she would have just been thrilled because she got to fly in a Spitfire, which was her favourite plane.
Yeah.
So, the more the merrier, really. And of course, I said earlier that she'd had 667 Spitfires, but of course flying this one again with Caroline Grace 50 years later became 668 times.
Yes, that's right. I mean, she flew so many. Didn't she fly a record number of planes?
Oh, she did. She flew 1,438 planes in the war. She ferried, and then the ATA ferried 309,011 units, as they called them, during the whole of the World War.
And of course it was such an important job, but when she got in it, it was just off the factory floor, almost, and she didn't really know which bits were going to work and which weren't.
No. She had a book, I found a book with all the warplanes in, pictures of them, and she'd written a bit on the top of each of the ones she'd flown, and she flew one plane, and she'd written on the top, a nice plane, but bits used to fall off it occasionally. So they weren't always in working order.
And also, they didn't just fly brand new planes, they actually flew old planes that were then being taken back to, I don't know.
Yeah, they would get taken back to be dumped, and they didn't always work. So you'd get in like the cockpit like this, and there'd be a little note saying, flaps don't work properly, or undercarriage dodgy, but you still had to fly it.
That was their job.
Yeah.
She was amazing right to her last day. I've seen so many pictures you've shown me of her when she was older, but she went along to all the reunions or whatever. She got herself pictured with people. She just loved her present, but she also loved her past, didn't she?
Yeah, she very much was very, very proud of being a ferry pilot, and also immensely proud of getting her RAF wings, and also because she was awarded a trophy for furthering the cause of women in aviation by the British Women Pilots Association when she became the first British woman airline captain. And I think those three things were her, well, she felt that she really had helped women, the cause for women in a man's world.
Yeah. Surely she still, I mean, that's one of the reasons that you talk about her a lot. She still is furthering the cause for women. Didn't she at one point, because she so wanted to break the sound barrier?
Yes, she
Didn't
tried.
she write to the Duke of Edinburgh?
She did. She wrote to the Duke of Edinburgh. She wrote to the Air Minister, she wrote to everybody. And eventually, when she went to the Duke of Edinburgh, she still got a letter back saying, well, of course, you know, we can't relinquish a jet to you for the because of the cause of other pilots, meaning the men, really. They wouldn't release. They wouldn't release, even though she trained on jets in the WRAF. They wouldn't do it. Britain was very slow, you know, at letting people get on and do things and logging them. And of course, in the end, Jacqueline Cochrane did it for America, which was a shame because it could have been a first for Britain, as she always said.
Well, look, OK, I'm enjoying this little chat, but let's get going now. You're the pilot, and please, no looping the loop.
No, I'll throw up.
Daisy, you've got the most fantastic name, actually, Daisy Grace. But this amazing aircraft, when did it first and how did it first come into the Grace family?
My late father-in-law, Nick Grace, brought it out the back of the Daily Mail, I believe, so back in the 70s. He wanted to fly a Spitfire and nobody would let him fly their Spitfire, so he was like, well, I'll just buy my own one.
Yeah, and he did.
And he did.
It
needed a lot of repair.
What sort of state? She was in a bad state when he first came across her.
Yeah, he did a lot of work, but I think some of the stories where people said, well, what do you want a two-seat Spitfire for? You know, surely it's a single-seat Spitfire, and here we are, you know, 40 years later with
still
something
flying
that
it and
can
taking people up in it. That's the point.
Exactly, and that's the future of it. You know, it can maintain itself by being able to offer these rides for people that can experience what.
And what sort of people come for rides in it?
It's very broad. We have ladies, the younger generation. I think last year we flew a young lady. She was an 18th birthday present.
Wow!
So you've got our minimum age is 18. All the way up to, you know, people, as long as they're fit and able, up into their 90s. And some of these people are absolutely amazing with how fit and strong, and you wouldn't even know they were in their late 90s or mid-90s.
No, but there's something magic about a Spitfire for a start, isn't there?
Yeah.
And it's unusual to find one where you can actually go up, be taken up for a fantastic ride of a lifetime.
Yes.
Talking about a lifetime, I mean, your family, the family you married into, sadly, all along the way has been beset by tragedy because your father-in-law, Nick, learned how to fly his Spitfire and flew it, but very tragically was killed in a car accident.
Yes.
And then years later, his widow, your mother-in-law, because she wanted to keep it going, she learned how to fly a Spitfire.
Yes.
And then not so long ago, she too was killed in a car accident.
Yeah.
Which is terribly ironic, given that they flew Spitfires for a living.
Yes.
And then I know that terribly sadly you lost your husband just a short while ago.
Yes. Yeah.
Are you determined to try and keep the business going, the legacy going?
When you are within a family that has so much determination and so much passion for something, and you just see like what it does and what it does to me, and it just gets in your blood, and you just, that passion carries on through me, and to be able to, you know, keep this aeroplane going for the memory of World War II and those that served in the war, and the legacy of Carolyn, Richard, Nick. I'm very proud. I'm heartbroken but proud to be able to have the strength to carry it on in their memories, in so many people's memories.
Yeah, and it still lives and flies in people's memories.
Yes.
Thank you so much for introducing us to her.
No,
She's
you're most
absolutely
welcome.
gorgeous.
I know,
Yeah.
beautiful.
It's been the day of a lifetime for us, it really has.
No, it's lovely to meet you.
Thank you.